Welcome to This Explainer. Today we've got a deeply fascinating political mystery to unpack. We are going to dive right into the baffling political endurance of Rodrigo Duterte and the massive rise of Ferdinand Marcos Jr. in the Philippines. We'll be doing this by analyzing their political strategies, their incredibly complex digital machinery, and the deep-seated psychological drivers of their supporters. All right, let's jump in.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the popularity paradox, move on to the appeal of instant politics, then digital autocratization, the psychology of support, the father figure archetype, and finally, nostalgia and the 2022 election.
Section 1. The Popularity Paradox. Let's get right into the jarring contrast that defines this whole phenomenon. 91%. Just let that number sink in for a second. It's September 2020, the economy's shrinking, we're in the absolute thick of a devastating global pandemic, and President Rodrigo Duterte hits a staggering 91% approval rating. While other global leaders were practically watching their support fall off a cliff under the weight of the crisis, his was rock solid. This right here brilliantly captures the paradox. Look at how astronomical approval and satisfaction ratings sit right next to intense, massive controversies. We're talking international condemnation for democratic erosion, a highly controversial war on drugs that resulted in thousands of casualties, and the jailing of vocal political critics. So you have to ask yourself, how on earth does a leader keep overwhelming, record-breaking support while simultaneously facing all of this? It's like a giant puzzle.
Section 2.
The appeal of instant politics.
To understand the why, we really need to look at the immense societal fatigue out there. Duterte capitalized on a public that was just completely exhausted by slow bureaucracy and broken promises. He offered them what analysts call instant politics. He literally promised this impossibly quick 3 to 6 month timeline to wipe out the nation's biggest problems. Now, sure, any logical mind might question that timeline, but his track record as a longtime mayor in Davao City made voters believe that this kind of instant action was actually doable on a national scale.
By contrasting the tedious, complex reality of standard democratic reform with his own brand of fast, decisive action, Duterte successfully securitized the drug problem. He essentially painted it as an existential threat, one that required extreme, immediate measures that completely bypassed slower institutions. And the public? Tired of the status quo, they totally bought into the idea that a strongman approach was the necessary cure.
Moving on to Section 3, digital autocratization, because selling that narrative required some unprecedented digital machinery.
Researchers define this specific environment as digital autocratization. Basically, it's a space where state-sponsored or outsourced cyber armies and paid influencers are weaponized. They're used to manufacture public support and aggressively silence any opposition. The digital sphere literally became a crucial battleground for political survival.
This structural weaponization actually follows 3 pretty distinct steps. First, echo chambers form on social media. Second, organized troll farms and paid influencers amplify those securitized narratives, like the absolute need for a brutal drug war. And third, dissenting voices are targeted, creating this massive chilling effect. It's a real game changer. The machinery was so effective that a former Facebook executive actually called the Philippines the patient zero of global disinformation.
So the key takeaway here is that digital autocratization leans on 2 distinct messaging strategies. On one side, you have Duterte's securitized narratives of law and order, which justified those harsh policies. And then, that exact same digital ecosystem paved the way for Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s nostalgic narratives, glorifying an autocratic past and mythical golden ages. The digital groundwork laid by one administration perfectly served the next. It was a seamless handoff.
Which brings us to Section 4, the psychology of support. We have to look at the human behavior sustaining this loyalty.
Here's the burning question. Why do supporters stay fiercely loyal, even when faced with overwhelming evidence of democratic erosion? Well, psychologists point out that intelligence actually has very little to do with it. Instead, it's all about how our human minds are naturally hardwired to deal with cognitive dissonance.
The first major psychological driver here is the sunk cost fallacy. This happens when supporters have invested so much of their personal identity, their time, and their social standing into a leader that withdrawing support feels like a direct attack on their own ego. Basically, to admit the leader is flawed is to admit they were wrong the whole time. And that is a tough pill to swallow.
This quote perfectly captures that exact feeling. As one analysis noted, defending the politician becomes exactly like staying in a toxic personal relationship out of sheer emotional exhaustion and time investment. The dissonance of admitting a mistake is just too overwhelming, right? So rationalizing the leader's behavior just becomes a necessary coping mechanism.
And this is totally compounded by the gambler's fallacy. Supporters rationalize poor governance by holding on to the mistaken hope that the leader will eventually change, that the big win is right around the corner. You constantly hear excuses like, just give him a chance, he's doing his best. It's a really powerful psychological loop that keeps approval ratings high regardless of objective failures.
Section 5. The Father Figure Archetype. To truly grasp this deep emotional connection, we have to look at culture. In the Philippines, Duterte is widely and affectionately called Tatay Digong, Father Digong. He perfectly embodies the traditional Filipino father figure archetype. He's a heavy-handed, strict disciplinarian who gets emotionally outraged when provoked. But crucially, he's forgiven for his extreme methods because his children, the citizens, truly believe he has their absolute best interests at heart. He's delivering tough love. And, you don't publicly criticize your father, even when he messes up. This cultural framing creates a massive shield against traditional political criticism.
Finally, Section 6. Nostalgia and the 2022 election.
So, how did this all set the stage for 2022? By inheriting Duterte's heavily manipulated social media ecosystem, Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. was able to execute a massive networked propaganda campaign. He successfully weaponized authoritarian nostalgia. By heavily utilizing platforms like TikTok and YouTube to completely bypass traditional media, his campaign convinced millions of voters that strongman rule was the only way to return to a mythical golden age of discipline. He essentially capitalized on the exact same democratic disillusionment that brought Duterte to power in the first place.
Which brings us to a final, really provocative thought. As we look at how easily political truths were reshaped in this explainer through systemic fatigue, psychology, and algorithms, it leaves us with a critical global warning. With AI evolving at lightning speed and digital influencers replacing traditional media, how will advanced technologies further distort our realities in the elections to come? It is absolutely a question every democracy needs to face right now. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and definitely keep questioning those narratives in your own digital feeds.